Hello everyone, this is Julia from the Newfoundland and Labrador Public Libraries. This recording is a short highlight from our virtual program, the Port Authority Reunion, an event featuring Morgan Murray and hosted by Lisa Moore. Thank you for joining us as we listen to Morgan place blame for his successful book Dirty Birds on everyone from his mother to his wife to his friends with the Port Authority Writing Group and even on Lisa Moore.
That's Dirty Birds, my book. Or as my dad calls it, Dirty Words. And thank you, Lisa, for that very flattering introduction. But there's one review that's kind of stuck in my craw, and it's this one from my mom. It's in the actual book. I think my mom has crashed this party, so hi, Mom. Anyway, so I thought I would, instead of just reading straight from the book, because we're all gathered here together to sort of reminisce, I want to figure out who's to blame for Dirty Birds, because it sure isn't me. Let's start with my mom. This is my mom.
Aww.
Just last year. But you'll notice she's in front of a big stack of books in a bookshelf that my dad built. And so I grew up in a house full of books, expected to know how to read and write. And then the next person we have to blame is Margot Husby Sheeler. Margot was a professor I had in Calgary, and very sadly she died during the H1N1 pandemic, way too young, but she was such a force of nature. And like Milton, Ontario, so maybe I should back up a little bit. Like Lisa said, Dirty Birds is about Milton, Ontario, not to be confused with Milton, Ontario, and he leaves his parents based in Bellybutton, Ontario, to go to Montreal to become a famous poet and a ladies' man. It's not completely autobiographical, but once upon a time, I moved to Montreal to become a famous poet and a ladies' man, and it didn't work out. And I moved home, and I emailed Margot and said, Margot, can we go for lunch? And so we had lunch at 1 p.m. at the Kilkenny Pub in Calgary in April of 2008. And she said, you need to move to Newfoundland and take the MPhil program. And for those of you who don't know what the MPhil program is, at the time, Jennifer Dyer was the director. And it's this crazy program full of crazy people doing all sorts of crazy humanities things. And I emailed Jen at 3:12 a.m. The day after I had lunch with Margot and said, I noticed the application deadline was in February. Do you think I can still get in? And she let me in. So Jennifer is partially to blame. And then there's Joan Sullivan. I think Joan is on the call. Hi, Joan. I love Joan. Part of the torture of the program was that each term paper you had to do an oral defense of it. And that was like pulling teeth. And the only sort of redeeming factor of those oral defenses was you got to do it with a colleague. And my first oral defense was with Joan. And I sent her a copy of my paper called The Town Makes Noise, but the Noise Makes the Town, Noise and Meaning by Morgan Murray on the 5th of December, 2008. And this is the second page of that paper. And Joan said, I really liked your paper. So she's partly to blame. And then it turns out that Joan was the editor of the Newfoundland Quarterly. And many of you probably know Joan. She's one of the sticky pieces of gum that holds the art scene in Newfoundland together. She's a wonderful human. And so I was chatting with her one day and she said, would you like to write anything for the Newfoundland Quarterly because I liked your paper so much? And I was like, I have no ideas. You can't publish anything I write. And she said, well, maybe a book review. And she handed me this book. And I can't remember every word she said, but I remember three things distinctly. She said, as a fun bit of trivia, apparently book designers crop women's figures in such a way that makes it more appealing to people in the bookstore if it's like a chopped up woman, which is kind of weird and creepy. But I'm sure everybody knows that. The second thing she told me is that Lisa Moore wrote the best sex scenes. And then I started blushing. And then she said, oh, yes, and by the way, Lisa is a very good friend of mine. And so I thought she was giving me her friend's romance novel. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to go well. But I was just new in Newfoundland, and I didn't have any friends. So I agreed to take this book and read it, even though I had my doubts. And so in June 10th, 2009, I also should mention I didn't know how to write a book review worth a darn. So I sent Joan, I think about 2,500 words for a 500-word book review, and with a really blah, blah, blah email. And Joan wrote back very concisely, I like this very much, but had to cut it for space. She did. She saved it. So it was in the summer edition of Newfoundland Quarterly, and there's a little review. And it's not a great review. It's a very positive review, but it's not a great, very well written review because I was still just a baby then. But I wanted to read you one little part of this because this is the reading section. February by Lisa Moore makes me wish I could write like her. February, which follows Helen O'Mara and her family's grappling with the loss, memory, and moving on after their husband and father Tal dies on the Ocean Ranger disaster, is how great prose should be, how it should sound in your head, feel in the pit of your stomach, catch you up short, empty you out, and fill you back up. So Joan's Pal's romance novel was a gut punch, and it was one of the best books I'd ever read. To this day, I think it's one of the best books ever to come out of Canada, and I became obsessed is a strong word, in awe of and a huge fan of Lisa Moore, who rumor had it lived in St. John's. So at this time,
thank you, Morgan. Wow.
You're welcome. So at this time, I was working at the Scope newspaper in St. John's, and so Elling Leon, who was the co-founder of the Scope and the jack of all trades there, is also partly to blame for all of this. And he gave me assignments like the smell map of St. John's. I won't tell you which neighborhood smelled the most like dog poop, but there was a few. And I also got to tweet hockey games where I made up stupid jokes about this guy named Garth Murray who was mean. And then I found out about this writing workshop, English 4910, Advanced Creative Writing Fiction, being taught by the one, the only Lisa Moore. And so I used a crafty little timer thing to send an email at 2:15 in the morning to the head of the English department saying, I don't have any of the requisites and the deadline has once again gone by, but do you think I could get in? And so Lisa Moore is also partly to blame for all of this, because Lisa emailed me a few days later very concisely again and said, you're in. And I said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So on May 9th, 2012, I sat in a room on the, is it the fourth floor, third floor of the English department in the Arts and Admin building at Mon with 15 strangers. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I was pooping my pants. I was so nervous because Lisa Moore was going to walk into the room at any minute. And she wrote February. Oh my God, oh my God. So anyway, it was a writing workshop, and every week I had to write something that Lisa Moore was going to read, and it was like the most anxiety-inducing, awful time of my life. Don't worry, I'm on medication now for anxiety. I'm doing much better after taking a writing workshop stint. But Lisa expected us to not only just write like stupid nonsense like I was used to writing, but she wanted us to write full, complete stories with beginnings, middles, ends, characters, plot development, arcs, and all these big words I didn't know what they meant. And so I figured instead of writing short stories, because they were hard, because somebody said that in a short story you can't waste a single word. Every word's got to have a purpose and a meaning, and it's all got to be this perfect piece of art. I figured I'll lie and say I'm writing a novel. So every piece I hand in, I'll just say it's an excerpt from a novel that doesn't exist and never will. And so if there's no ending and the characters aren't really well developed and the setting is kind of iffy, I'll say, oh, it's just an excerpt. You need to read the other 500 pages of this non-existent novel. So that was how I was going to outsmart Lisa Moore. So I wrote this. So this is where Dirty Birds started. So it really is Lisa Moore's fault. So I found this. This is an assignment I handed in to this course, believe it or not. Passed the course, believe it or not. So I want to read you this, and then I'll read you what it became in the book towards the end of this rigmarole here. So it's called Poet. The file was called Drugs. That's, I don't know, you'll see why. The company brokered clinical trials for drug companies, big drug companies, the ones that were part of even bigger companies, the big companies that make drugs for keeping old dicks hard on one coast. I'm sorry about the language. Dirty words. Figuring out whose fault it is. Casserole dishes on the other, nuclear-tipped surface-to-air missiles that they test over endless fields of corn they grow somewhere in the middle to make into breakfast cereal, plastic explosives, condoms, and diesel fuel. It was nothing untoward or particularly deplorable, just clinical trials of experimental drugs, but not even. Just the brokering, just the middle between the sick and their doctors and side effects, cotton mouth, swollen lymph nodes, yellowing of the eyes, increased heart rates, increased libido, nausea, all with code names and numbers. And the healing wing of these supranational money-making mega machines was all quite humdrum, boring. Nothing even all that titillating in a Discovery Channel medical special sense. Just a lot of forums about genital warts and diarrhea, endless paperwork and triplicate, blue ballpoint pens and all originals, a lot of data entry, a lot of filing, a lot of endless color-coded BS, and me, the secretary for the secondary service wing, the computer and paperwork people, the least sexy, most unromantic of all conceivable menial shit jobs possible. Nothing good could come of it, besides rent, I suppose. But even that was supposed to be a struggle. Even that was supposed to lead somewhere. Adventure, intrigue, genital warts. You know, the things people write poems about, that novels about, that memoirs about to set the story straight before the movie of your life is made. It was the second interview I'd gotten in nearly 3 months, both out of applications sent through the job search website. The other menial office clerk job at a college went south when I got nervous and failed a typing test. I failed a typing test. Edited this a little bit. The fates conspired to get me the second interview for a drug middlers a couple of days after my credit card had maxed out and I was living off day-old bread and half-rotten 2-for-1 pineapples from the 2-bit fruit peddler around the corner. All of my delusions of living large and subsequent literary fame that was sure to follow had been reduced to 12-hour naps and one meal of stale bread and half-rotten pineapple in the late evening, the gaps between filled by constantly refreshing Facebook. I read a poem about the band Nickelback, which sounded more like a grocery list than anything, at an open mic the month before. So when the interview came around, I was well into my 3rd or 4th week of calling myself a writer. I would have said poet, but that was all too Grecian. That was too Leonard Cohen. I wasn't ready for that kind of pretense yet. I figured I'd hold off the poet bit until someone asked me to read my poetry in front of a crowd. Open mics don't count. I'm not some kind of egomaniac. When I explained that to the human resources manager, a surly Greek woman, that I was a writer, she nodded an impressed nod. Apparently, not a lot of writers applied for their strange drug testing data entry job way the hell out at the end of the metro line. She asked me what I wrote. Poetry, I told her. She was even more impressed. She had never met a real poet before. She told me, in all honesty, that the data entry job would be no good for me. It's too mindless, too monotonous, too miserable for a free-spirited poet. But, she said, on the QT, they're looking to open a new position for administrative assistant for the IT and QT departments. I'll stop there because we'd be here all night. Oh wait, it gets worse. Part of the feedback, or part of the workshop, all the students had to give feedback to the excerpts that you submitted each week. And this one, the person who wrote this is not in Port Authority, not on this call. But I'll say it's interesting, but somewhat, not sure the right word is, rambling. Blah, 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 goes on to end. Is the narrator on drugs? So, probably. So the class ends, and that ball in my stomach is still there, and I don't know if I've learned anything because I'm so scared. And then Lisa Moore sends out this email, because Lisa Moore is a saint, people. And this email just says, maybe we should keep meeting. And now that I think of it, she's either a saint or she thought we were very slow learners, because we had been together for 4 months and we still hadn't got the point. So she agreed to continue to meet with us, and that gave birth to the Port Authority Writing Group.
Wow.
That is a very grainy photograph of our first book launch. We're not a softball team. We'd be a terrible softball team, but we all had matching t-shirts.
Oh.
I don't know if you can see me, but I found a shirt, guys. There's your shirts,
Wow.
guys. So one thing led to another, and a few years later, Lisa had long been done with us because we outlived our purpose for her. She even brought her poor daughter Eva a few times, and Eva was like, screw this nonsense, I'm out of here. I'm going to the mall. But Lisa put together a collection of short stories that we all wrote called Racket, and it was a wild experience. So fast forward a few years later, and enter my sister. She's also to blame for this because she came to visit me at a sort of rocky time in my personal life, and we went to St. Pierre and Miquelon. I highly encourage everybody to go. It's such a beautiful, wonderful place. But we went for 3 days, and there's only 2 days worth of stuff to do. So one day I was on the lawn in downtown. They also close all the businesses from noon till 2. So if you don't get lunch before noon, you're going to be sleeping outside of the restaurant. But we ran out of things to do. So we walked down the end of this thing to a lighthouse and sat at the bottom of the lighthouse. And my sister asked me, so what is this book you're working on? And I don't know how she found out about it, but this is partially her fault because we sat there and came up with an outline for a novel just based on these stupid little excerpts about semi-autobiographical first-person sweary little things I'd been submitting to this workshop. And so we came up with a full, this, folks, for those who don't know what award-winning novel outlines look like, it's in a stained little notebook. It fits on one page. It's upside down. You lose it for months at a time, and you can't remember what happens next. This is very professional. So I'm showing you how the sausage is made. Please don't screen capture this and sell it because it's my livelihood. So fast forward a little further on, and I meet Katie, also known as Kate Beaton, the cartoonist, and we end up getting married. And she's partially to blame for this too, because one day I was minding my own business, sitting on the couch, and she said, "Hey, don't you have a book deal? Aren't you supposed to write a book?" And I was like, yeah, I guess. And so I had to get up off the couch. And so for 2 hours a night, every night, and Saturday and Sunday, as much as I could, I would write, and I would write, and I would write. So here is an example of a first draft of some Newfoundland dialogue. Jamie Fitzpatrick could probably translate that for you because he's from Gander. And then this happened. So Mary Louise was born in the middle of the editing. And I don't know if any of you have tried to edit the book with a newborn. It's not always easy. And not only were we making one book in the house, but we were making two. And so it was quite a thing. And so the next step was a cover. And I had struggled for weeks to come up with a cover with Breakwater, the publisher. And Kate Beaton, the cartoonist, was sitting on the couch next to me, and she said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. Give that to me." And she took away my pencil and she scribbled this down on a piece of paper in about 30 seconds, and it was like angels from the heavens opened up, and you heard, "Oh!" And Birds, the book cover, was born, which is one of the most beautiful book covers I've ever seen, and I'm extremely biased. And then Will Ferguson is a fantastic humorist and fiction writer, if you're not familiar with who he is, which means he has a good sense of humor and he lies a lot. So I asked him for a blurb because this is a whole other story, but I met him like 15 years ago at a book event, and he said, "If you ever write anything," because I told him, "You're my hero." This was before I met Lisa. And he gave me his email address and said, "If you ever write anything, send it to me." And 15 years later, I did, and he wrote me a blurb and called me Vonnegut, which is payback, I guess, for something. I'm sorry, Will. But it was amazing, and I was floored, and it is the reason that the book sold anything at all, and the reason I got on CBC in Saskatchewan 6 times, which I don't know why. Anyways, and then Lisa gave a much more reasonable, "It's funny." And I've also appreciated that.
My blurb was much longer. That's what I was printing on the back.
It's in the actual book. So that was Dirty Birds. Dirty Birds was born. So these days, Mary dresses and acts a little bit like Ted Cruz on vacation. This is from a few days ago. And Dirty Birds has taken on a life of its own. It was longlisted, like Lisa mentioned, for Canada Reads. And so now I'm a huge deal and worldly famous. And I don't know how any of that happened. So I will finish that probably too long. How do I stop sharing my screen? I don't know how to. I'm sorry. I'm ruining it for everyone. Stop sharing screen. Oh my God, you guys, this is a disaster.
It's